Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? Tonight, let's step into the grand halls of medieval castles not to admire kings, queens, or noble knights, but to look at the strange, precarious life of the one figure who was both inside and outside the court. The Jester, dressed in motley colors, with bells jingling at every step. The Jester was meant to amuse, to make nobles laugh, and to cut through the heaviness of politics and ceremony with wit and absurdity. On the surface, it might sound like a dream job telling jokes, mocking authority, being the life of the party. But behind the mask of humor, being a court jester was far from easy. Their role was dangerous, humiliating, and often thankless. They walked a razor's edge between entertainment and insult, where one poorly timed joke could cost them their position or even their life. In this first part of our journey, we'll set the stage by exploring how jesters became fixtures of medieval courts, why kings and queens kept them close, and what made their presence so valuable in an age where laughter could be as political as war. The origins of the medieval fool go back centuries, blending traditions of traveling minstrels, storytellers, and entertainers who wandered from town to town by the Middle Ages. These figures had found a permanent place inside castles and noble households, but they weren't simply entertainers, they were pressure valves, using humor to diffuse tension in rooms filled with power, rivalry, and ambition. A good jester could lighten the mood after a heated debate, poke fun at a noble without provoking a duel, and even disguise sharp political commentary beneath the veil of comedy. Yet that same humor could backfire if a monarch decided the laughter had gone too far. In short, the jester's life was a constant balancing act, part performer, part truth-teller, and part scapegoat, in a world where comedy was never just about laughs. If you picture a medieval jester, the image that probably comes to mind is almost cartoonish. Bright, mismatched clothes, bells that jingled with every move, and a floppy hat shaped like donkey ears or a rooster's comb. Surprisingly, that caricature isn't too far from the truth, though the symbolism ran deeper than simple comedy. The jester's outfit was called motley, a patchwork of clashing colors designed to make them instantly recognizable. In a hall filled with nobles dressed in velvet, silk, and furs, the jester stood out as a figure of deliberate absurdity. He was meant to look ridiculous, to remind everyone that his place was different, that he was outside the usual rules of decorum. The most iconic piece was the fool's cap, a hood often adorned with donkey ears, horns, or a mock crown tipped with little bells. To wear this hat was to carry a visible badge of foolishness, a signal that everything the jester said was to be taken in jest, or at least could be excused as such. In a world where words could get a man executed for treason, this strange little hat provided a kind of protection, but it was also a trap. The costumes stripped away dignity and made sure the jester could never be mistaken for an equal at court. It was both license and cage, a pass to speak freely, and at the same time, a permanent reminder of his inferior status. Some jesters leaned into the role, exaggerating their gestures, playing with the bells and cap, and using the ridiculous outfit as a weapon of humor. Others found it humiliating, a daily reminder that no matter how clever or insightful they would forever be seen as the fool. In essence, the motley clothes were more than a costume, they were a mask that allowed dangerous truths to be spoken, while also branding the speaker as someone who could never fully escape his role. A medieval jester could never rely on jokes alone to survive in the courts and to keep their audience entertained night after night. They needed an arsenal of talents that went far beyond silly quips. Most were accomplished performers. They sang bawdy ballads, played instruments like the lute or drum, and recited poetry, sometimes weaving sharp satire into verses that made nobles laugh while stinging their pride. Many were acrobats or jugglers, able to dazzle crowds with physical feats as easily as they teased them with words. Improvisation was their greatest weapon. A jester had to think quickly, turning every stumble, mistake, or awkward silence into a chance for humor. Wit was survival because a joke that fell flat might mean more than embarrassment. It could mean falling out of favor with a powerful patron, but perhaps the most dangerous skill was mockery. Jesters were expected to poke fun at everyone from knights and courtiers to the king himself. They had to walk a razor's edge, biting enough to be entertaining, but not so offensive as to cross into unforgivable insult. A clever jester knew how to cloak sharp criticism in humor, speaking truths that others dared not say, but framing them as jokes so they could be laughed off. Many also had a surprising role as keepers of memory. Because they were present at feasts, councils, and ceremonies, jesters sometimes became walking archives of gossip, scandals, and even political events, using their humor to remind the court of past mistakes or victories. In short, being a jester was not just about making people laugh. It was about being an actor, a musician, a satirist, a confidant, and a survivor, all rolled into one. To thrive in such a role required brilliance as much as foolishness, and courage as much as humor. For all the laughter they created, life as a jester was anything but easy. Behind the jingling bells and painted smiles lay a profession filled with danger, humiliation, and constant uncertainty. Jesters were, above all, expendable. They lived at the mercy of their patron, usually a nobleman or monarch, whose mood could shift from amusement to fury in an instant. A joke that struck too close to home could cost a jester not only his position, but sometimes his freedom or even his life. More than one fool throughout history was beaten, exiled, or executed for forgetting his place. Even when safe from deadly consequences, humiliation was an everyday reality. Jesters were expected to entertain on demand, no matter the occasion or their own feelings. They might be forced to act ridiculous, wear outlandish costumes, or suffer physical comedy at their own expense, like pratfalls and mock beatings, simply to keep their audience laughing. Socially, they were outsiders. A jester could spend his life among kings and queens, yet never truly belong. Nobles might laugh at his jokes, but would rarely treat him as an equal. In many courts, jesters ate at separate tables, slept in modest quarters, and were seen as curiosities rather than respected individuals. There was also the constant threat of replacement. A single dull performance, a rival with fresher jokes, or the changing tastes of a fickle court could send a jester back to the streets. Unlike knights or clerics, their role carried little long-term security. Today's favorite could be tomorrow's forgotten fool. Worst of all, jesters bore the crushing weight of being forced to laugh when they themselves had little to smile about. Many lived in poverty before entering service and faced loneliness even within the grandest halls. They were the ones tasked with lifting others' spirits, while no one bothered to lift theirs. The fool's cap may have jingled merrily, but beneath it often lay exhaustion, fear, and the bitter knowledge that a single misstep could turn laughter into doom. Despite the humiliations and risks, some jesters managed to carve out a role far more powerful than simple entertainers, because they were expected to be irreverent, to mock and tease without consequence. Jesters occasionally gained a freedom no courtier, knight, or minister could dare claim: the right to speak truth to power. Wrapped in humor, their words could challenge kings, expose corruption, or point out flaws in policy that others were too afraid to voice. A biting joke about a failed campaign, a sarcastic remark about heavy taxes, or a playful parody of a greedy noble could spark laughter while planting seeds of reflection in the ruler's mind. Some jesters became trusted confidants, using their wit as both shield and weapon. They were uniquely positioned to observe court politics from the margins, where they saw rivalries and intrigues unfolding with fewer constraints. While most nobles were bound by etiquette and fear, the fool could disguise sharp criticism as comedy, softening blows that might otherwise be deadly. But this power was delicate, balanced on a knife's edge. One misjudged line could turn clever satire into unforgivable offense. A wise fool knew how far he could push, when to veil his words, and when silence was the safest performance of all. The most successful jesters became more than mere clowns. They were advisors cloaked in motley, guardians of honesty who spoke in riddles and rhymes. Their legacy reveals that even in societies ruled by fear and hierarchy, laughter could sometimes be the sharpest blade of all. As the medieval world gave way to the Renaissance and later the modern age, the figure of the court jester slowly disappeared from the palaces of Europe. Kings and queens no longer relied on a single motley-clad clown to speak uncomfortable truths or lighten heavy banquets. Instead, professional actors, playwrights, and musicians took over the role of public entertainment. But the fool never truly vanished. He transformed in the theaters of Shakespeare. The jester lived on in characters like Feste in Twelfth Night, or the fool in King Lear, who combined comic relief with piercing insight. These figures were not merely stage clowns, but sharp commentators, reminding audiences that wisdom could come wrapped in folly. Even as courts modernized, the image of the jester lingered in popular imagination. The cap with its bells, the mismatched colors, and the wooden bauble became timeless symbols of playful rebellion. Painters, poets, and later novelists often used the fool as a metaphor for the outsider who dares to speak truth when no one else can. In a sense, the jester's spirit survived by moving out of the castles and into culture itself. Political satirists, comedians, and cartoonists inherited his mantle. turning laughter into a tool for critique and reflection. Every time a joke pierces the pride of the powerful, every time satire holds a mirror to society's flaws, the medieval fool still whispers in the background. So while the profession itself may have sucked for those who lived it, the legacy of the jester endures, proof that sometimes the sharpest truths are best told with a smile. Although we usually imagine the jester as a purely European figure dancing in the halls of English kings or making jokes, in French courts the idea of the fool was much broader. Nearly every great civilization had some version of the entertainer who mixed humor with truth, mockery with wisdom. In China, jesters were known at the imperial court during the Han dynasty. One famous example was Yushi, who cleverly used wit to dissuade the emperor from a disastrous military campaign. In India, royal courts often had Vidushakas, comic figures who appeared in Sanskrit dramas and entertained kings with satire, puns, and playful criticism. Even in the Aztec Empire, entertainers known as huhu played similar roles, using laughter to ease tensions in a rigidly hierarchical society. What all these figures shared was a strange paradox. They were simultaneously lowly and powerful, stripped of status in one sense, marked for their appearance, their clothes, their foolishness. They nonetheless held unique influence. They could joke about things no one else dared to mention. In cultures where challenging a king or emperor might mean death, the fool alone could sometimes bend the rules. This universality suggests something deeply human about the figure of the jester. Across time and continents, societies found it necessary to create a space for laughter, a sanctioned outlet where truth could be disguised as play. Whether in Rome, Beijing, or London, the fool carried the same duality, ridiculous on the surface, indispensable underneath. Even after the courts of Europe faded and the official role of the jester disappeared, the figure refused to vanish. Instead, it slipped into stories, theater, and later into film and popular culture, where the fool continued to wear many masks. In Shakespeare's plays, the jester often became one of the wisest voices on stage. Characters like the fool in King Lear or Feste in Twelfth Night blurred the line between comedy and philosophy, offering insight through riddles and songs. Their humor was light on the surface but heavy with meaning, a reflection of how real medieval fools had once walked the same delicate path. The imagery of the jester also lived on in art and literature. In paintings, he was sometimes portrayed as lonely, standing apart from the crowd, his bells and colors a stark reminder of both joy and melancholy. The jester became a symbol of life's contradictions, someone who smiles outwardly, but may hide sorrow inside. Modern media kept the archetype alive in new forms. The clown in a circus, the Joker in a deck of cards, and even comic book villains like the Joker from Batman can all trace their lineage back to the medieval fool. Each of them captures the same essence: unpredictability, laughter tinged with danger, and the unsettling truth that comedy can reveal what seriousness cannot. In a way, the jester never really died. He simply changed costumes, adapting to each new stage humanity built, whether in theater, novels, cinema, or even the carnival masks of Venice. Wherever societies gather to laugh at themselves, the jester's spirit can still be found, reminding us that folly and wisdom often come hand in hand. The jester has always lived in a paradox. On the surface, he was ridiculous, dressed in mismatched colors, jingling with bells, forever the butt of jokes. Yet beneath the painted smile lay a figure who often held more power than those who mocked him. This duality is what made the fool both fascinating and dangerous. To the king, the jester could be a release, a safe outlet for frustrations, a mirror that reflected the truth in playful exaggeration. But that same mirror could cut too deeply. A careless remark could sting the monarch's pride, and in those moments, the fool's laughter became a gamble with survival. Was he too daring, too honest, or just clever enough to escape punishment with another joke? This tension followed jesters in every court. They lived at the edge of privilege and ruin, able to dine with lords one evening and risk a whipping the next morning. They were both insiders and outsiders loud into the heart of power, yet never fully belonging to it. The duality also shaped how society saw them. To peasants, the jester was a figure of envy, someone who had access to kings and nobles while speaking the forbidden truths of common life. To the nobility, he was both amusement and annoyance, a necessary but unsettling presence who constantly reminded them that authority could be mocked. In this way, the fool became a walking contradiction, both mocked and respected, both powerless and dangerously free, both entertainer and truth-teller. And perhaps this was his greatest role, not just to amuse, but to show that even in the most rigid hierarchies, laughter could bend the rules of power. As the centuries passed, the The medieval jester slowly vanished from castles and great halls, replaced by new forms of entertainment: minstrels, theater troupes, and later the actors of Renaissance stages. Yet the image of the fool never disappeared. Instead, it evolved. The motley costume and cap with bells became shorthand for humor itself, a symbol that outlived the courts which once gave it meaning. In literature and theater, fools appeared as both clowns and philosophers, speaking lines of comedy laced with unexpected wisdom. Shakespeare's fools, for instance, were never just jesters, they were truth-tellers in disguise, mocking vanity, exposing corruption, and reminding audiences that power could not shield a man from ridicule. Over time, the fool became something larger than an entertainer. He became a symbol of the human condition, our fragility, our contradictions, and our endless dance between wisdom and folly. His laughter was not simply noise, it was survival, protest, and sometimes even prophecy. Today, when we see the image of a clown or joker, echoes of the medieval fool remain. The jester's bells still ring faintly in our stories, reminding us that humor has always been more than amusement. It is a weapon, a shield, and a mirror. To be a medieval court jester was to live on the edge of brilliance and danger. It was a role of privilege and humiliation, of freedom and captivity, of survival through wit in a world where a single misplaced word could cost everything. And yet, despite the risks, the fool endures not because of the bells or the colorful garb, but because of what he represented. He embodied the truth that laughter is powerful enough to disarm kings, soften tyranny, and reveal the fragility of human pride. In the end, the jester's life may have been filled with hardship, but his voice echoed longer than he ever imagined. His laughter became eternal, a reminder that in every age, power fears only one thing more than silence: the sound of being mocked.